Hi everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. And in the month of July 2023, I'm going to talk exclusively about Criterion releases. This is to coincide with the Barnes & Noble half price sale on Criterions for the month of July, which I think is going on until July 28th. So I'm going to talk about films that I have purchased during the sale, but I'm also going to intersperse some films that I call Criterion classics, and these are the all-time great films that are in the collection that I've never talked about before. So today I'm going to talk about The Rules of the Game, and this is a Jean Renoir film from 1939, and recently, in the recent Sight and Sound poll from 2022, it placed 13 and in the critics poll, and in the directors poll, number 38. And I would have to say also that this is the Blu-ray. Now, in June of 2023, this Criterion released this, upgraded it to a 4K UHD, which I have not purchased. I'm perfectly happy with the Blu-ray, but somewhere down the line I might actually buy it. I have not been upgrading my Blu-rays to 4Ks, and I watched it recently on my 4K television set, and I didn't. It looked perfectly presentable to me. And in fact, I came across a 2004 review of the DVD release of Criterion release of The Rules of the Game by Roger Ebert, a four-star review. He spends a whole paragraph extolling DVDs and what a great format that is. And you know, it's kind of it's kind of ironic, kind of quaint to look back at DVDs, which a lot of video files sort of disdain today. How joyous this format was, even to professional film critics. And part of the appeal of The Rules of the Game is that every time I see it, and I've seen it many, many times, every time I see it, it's almost as if I'm seeing it for the first time. It's a film that is so rich in character and in detail and behavior and technical expertise. I see something new every time, and that's not just me. I mean, there's many. I mean, that is one of the most ubiquitous reactions to the films by its admirers. And it's a film. Is it a farce, a comedy, a tragedy? It's a movie about life, but it does center on, certainly center on the game of love. This is the game of love triangles among the upper class in 1930s French society. And these romantic triangles are mirrored in the servant class of their employers. So Renoir loved doubling up things, so we have one plot amongst the upper classes and we see the mirror image in the servant class. Amorous adventures with rules, and if you break these rules, there are consequences. Renoir viewed society as a group of cliques, and every clique has its own rules. And if you break these rules, you might very much suffer the consequences of it. So we have an upper class made up of the Marquis, who is played by Marcel Dalio. This is a Jewish Marquis, and Marcel Dalio was a Jewish actor. In fact, you would probably recognize, if you're familiar with Casablanca, and who isn't, he plays the croupier in Casablanca, in Rook's Place. He doesn't actually get a credit in that movie, however. So the Marquis, he's married to a beautiful, elegant woman who he's very much in love with, but he has a mistress as well, and this mistress is a long-term mistress, and he's loath to give her up. And Christina, his wife, is having a fling herself with a celebrity aviator, and this celebrity aviator, he does not recognize the rules that he's bound to play by. So And he sets in motion a great deal of the plot in that Christine has several other suitors as well. So there's jealousy that abounds in this relationship that on the surface seems calm. And then Christine's personal maid, Lisette, she is the center of the servant romantic triangle with a jealous husband and a new servant at the chateau who, as soon as he sets his eyes on her, he's pursuing her. And the other main character in this film is the character of Octave, who is sort of like the court jester. He's a friend to all. He's a bit of a bumbler in his life. He's unsuccessful, but he's a great friend to everybody. He's very sympathetic to everybody's emotional needs. This is played by Jean Renoir himself in a delightful performance. So there's basically three sections to the film. We're in Paris in the opening section where we meet the main characters, and they're so vividly drawn. And again, the technical skill here is just outstanding. Then we have sort of an interlude where they go to the countryside to the Marquis Chateau. There's a hunt, and this hunt is very, very disturbing, with rabbits and birds, and it's hard to watch. But Renoir meant for this to be hard for his audience to watch, because it is a metaphor, but it also plays very dramatically into the conclusion of the film. And then the final section, one of the most brilliant sections in film history, is the party at the chateau. It's a costume party, there's skits, there's songs being performed, but all the jealousies, all the romantic entanglements amongst both the upper class and their servants mingle together in a just frantic farce, where Renoir was influenced by playwrights, Mirabeau, also the Barber of Seville. There's a lot going on in this technically just a masterpiece of staging. And all this time, and so this is the farce, and the war, this is 1939, the war is not mentioned at all in this film. So, in 1939, the Munich Accords had failed. Hitler had taken over Czechoslovakia. The French knew that sooner or later Hitler would turn their eyes on their country. And we're seeing this frantic farce. And in subsequent interviews, Renoir would say of the French society, we were dancing on a volcano. So even though the war is not mentioned here, the hunt and the whole atmosphere of the idiocy of the class structure that the society was living in was about to fall apart. But in Renoir's movies, there are no real villains, but there are no real heroes as well. And one of the most famous quotes from the film, Octave, Jean Renoir, says that the awful thing about life is this: everyone has their reasons. Now, that second part of the quote is often, associated with Renoir, one of the probably the most famous quote associated with Renoir, but they often leave out the first part, is this is the awful thing about life. Everybody has their reasons. How do we live together when we all have reasons that mean so much to us? So as far as the technical proficiency that I mentioned earlier, much of this is due to Renoir's love of deep focus, of long takes in deep focus. So we have a foreground, we have a background. They all mesh together. They're all commenting on each other. It really comes into fore in the frantic farce of the party scene. And Renoir was very much a technical director, but his main interest still was with the actors. And this was he had a screenplay for this film, and it was a movie that he was thinking about for a very long time, where he wanted to go back to classical French farce into a modern setting, but he did not have the dialogue. He had to know who the actors were going to be before he could write the dialogue. And then even when he wrote the dialogue, he encouraged his actors to come up with their own dialogue, their own ideas of what these characters would say. And the supplements of this release, and let me tell you, this is a fantastic special edition kind of super duper release from Criterion. We have interviews amongst these supplements. Are interviews with some of the supporting cast, and they all mentioned that how invested the actors were in their characters, and they would meet together and talk about their characters and their relationships to each other. So we are seeing a film being created, basically created on set. We have the basic structure. Renoir was not like most directors all around the world were in the 1930s and the 20s, he was not a dictator. He wanted a joyful atmosphere on the set. He wanted everybody to contribute, cast and crew. So the release history of this is just a story unto itself, because in 1939, Renoir was coming off of two big hits. One was The Grand Illusion, which played worldwide success, including the United States. So Renoir started his own production company, which this was the first movie and probably the last. And when he had great expectations for this. He thought this was going to be a big hit. It opened at a swanky theater in the upper class section of Paris, and it was a disaster. It was hissed and booed. People threatened to burn down the theater. So Renoir was forced to cut. He cut most of his own performance out because he was getting very poor reviews for his own performance, and the producer himself didn't particularly like the fact that Renoir was acting in this movie. So it got down to 80-some minutes, but it was still very much disliked, eventually banned for being, not giving a patriotic view of French society. But even after the war, when it was shown, it was banned again by the post-war government. But it was sort of an underground film, shown at film societies. This is the truncated version, and Truffaut, Francois Truffaut, Jacques Rivette, Eric Romer, Jean-Luc Godard, the French New Wave that I so love and admire, they thought the film was fantastic, even in its truncated form. In '59, amongst a pile of film that was recovered from a bombed out building in Paris, because the original cut was thought to be lost, the original cut was discovered, and it was able to be, at least the original elements, and they were able to reconstruct it according to Renoir's instructions, and also, but there was one 2-minute scene that they couldn't find, but Renoir says it was an insignificant scene. The film doesn't play any differently without it. So now this reconstructed version played in a film festival. Everybody said, "What is this? This is one of the greatest films ever made." And played in France, and suddenly Renoir was now, a genius. and I think he was living in the U.S. at the time, but he was so bemused by this. I was a traitor 20 years ago. I was a traitor. I was an idiot. I didn't know how to make films, and now, my film has become the greatest film, of all time. And in 1962, Sight and Sound poll, I think it was second to Citizen Kane in the poll, and it was in the top 10 for decades of that poll until this recent 2022 poll, where it fell to number 13 in the consensus of the critics list. And it was a big influence on film directors. And in fact, in this booklet, and again, these are the days when Criterion would give you very expansive booklets. We get tributes to the film by various film directors, including Paul Schrader, Alain Resnais, the great film critic Robin Wood, Noah Baumbach, Wim Wenders. So, and probably, though Robert Altman doesn't contribute to this. Robert Altman is really the heir of Jean Renoir, if there ever was one, in his ensemble kind of, and especially the rules of the game, which with his ensemble cast, and Gosford Park itself is really a kind of remake. It's certainly a tribute to the rules of the game. Now, perhaps there's one misstep in the film, and this would be the casting of Nora Grigor as Christine, the Marquis's wife. And she was an actress, but she was on the run. Her and her husband, who were actual aristocrats, they were on the run from the Nazis. Her husband was openly anti-Nazi, anti-Hitler, and Renoir met her. I think they were at he noticed her in one night when he was at the theater. He befriended them, and learned that Nora Grigor, who he was very much smitten with, according to in the supplements, the actresses in the sporting cast say that he might have been actually in love with her. But he realized that she was not projecting very well. She was stiff. So he did cut some of her scenes out. It's a misstep, to be sure, but, love is blind. So the rules of the game, certainly, as I said, I'm not upgrading my Blu-rays to 4Ks, at least not yet. But if you never have had this, if you've never seen this film or had it in your collection, perhaps its reputation is on the decline. But in my view, if there is a candidate for one of the 10 greatest films of all time, the rules of the game has to be in the conversation. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.